If you are trying to keep track of what lawmakers are up to in Austin, hope your head is on a swivel. There is so much going on between property taxes and a special session, a very public rift now between the governor and lieutenant governor, and yes, that impeachment issue. So to talk about it all, we have Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report, joining us now. Scott, thanks so much for being here. I know it's very busy for you and all things that you cover. I want to start with property taxes. That's the focus of this special session. There's some political strategy at play there, which we'll get to in a second. But can you talk can you talk about the differences in the House version of the property tax bill and the Senate version?
Well, I'll go with the current ones because, as you know, there have been variations of these plans all throughout the legislative session and now into the special session. Now, this special session, which is just about over now, it was very special, wasn't it? The House version now is what the governor asked for, and I will stress here that it's the first time, this week is the first time that Governor Abbott has been specific about what he wants lawmakers to do when it comes to giving you, the viewer, some kind of property tax relief. He has been silent about it all year while he's been on a roadshow about school vouchers. He could have been at the Capitol trying to broker a deal on this. But the House version right now is to do what's called tax compression. The easy way to think about that is that it would be the state writing a bigger check to local school districts, sending money down through the school funding formulas to pay and pick up a bigger part of the tab for public education, which, as you know, is the biggest chunk of your property tax bill, is the ISD in your area. The Senate version is going to be more politically popular. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has been pushing a homestead exemption increase. He started out the session talking about increasing it to $70,000, and it was kind of like an auction. At some point during the legislative session, the House came out with a plan to do a $100,000 exemption. And so then the Senate said, well, that sounds good to us. So now that's what the Senate's still going with, is a $100,000 property tax exemption for homesteads. So here you have two plans that are not alike, but it shouldn't be that hard. That one of the veterans of the Capitol the other day was saying, how hard is it to give away $16 billion or $17 billion? Well, these guys are, proving to us now that it's difficult for them to do. But if you think about the campaign that Governor Abbott waged last year when he won, when he beat Beto O'Rourke, this was his biggest promise to Texans. And right now, he is not providing the kind of leadership it takes to get it done.
Is it becoming personal? Let me put it that way. Is that what's holding this whole thing up? Because like you said, they don't seem like they're that far apart. But you've got not only, it's not new that the speaker and the lieutenant governor are not getting along. It seemed unusual last night to me that the lieutenant governor came out and basically blasted the governor for siding with the House in this whole thing. Am I getting all the players right in this?
You've got it. Look, this is the most critical that I've ever seen Lieutenant Governor Patrick be of Governor Abbott. That has never been the case before. They've disagreed before, but this is just a public roasting of the governor by the lieutenant governor. And Patrick says, look, he's going to stand pat on this, and he's not going to change his mind about the policy prescription for this. And I would say, look, it's not unusual for the speaker and the lieutenant governor to disagree, no matter who those people are. When Patrick was the lieutenant governor and Speaker Strauss was there, they would disagree sometimes. There's a reason that there are three big leaders in Texas. There's a reason that it's an odd number. If two of them don't agree, the other one has to be the referee. And Governor Abbott, months ago, could have seen that Phelan and Patrick were not in agreement about this, and he should have sat them down and tried to broker some kind of deal, and he hasn't done that. Instead, he's called for a special session, and he's trying to order the legislature to do something specific, which, look, these folks don't work for the governor, and it's important for folks to understand that. The governor, lieutenant governor, the speaker, and the members of the House and Senate, they all work for you, the taxpayers. So they need to be working collaboratively to get this done, and they're not doing that. And the governor might be wise to give these folks a break. Like you said, Steve, they're angry with each other. At the end of a legislative session, after being stuck in the Capitol together for 5 months, the tempers flare, there are egos involved. Policy prescriptions sometimes are secondary to those things, and they could probably all use a break from each other. And that would also give the governor time to sell lawmakers on his plan and try to create some consensus. He's just not doing that right now.
At the end of the day, political infighting, that's nothing new. At the end of the day, is anything actually going to get done on property taxes? The House approved its version. They went ahead and adjourned for the special session.
They're done, yeah.
What does that mean for the Senate version and ultimately what the governor may or may not sign?
The House actually did two things. They approved the version that Governor Abbott likes, but they also outright rejected the plan that came over from the Senate. The Speaker ruled that, and I don't even necessarily agree with this, but he ruled that the Senate plan is not germane to what Governor Abbott asked for. There's a lot of case law on this and historical information about the fact that the governor's not really allowed, doesn't really have the power to dictate specific policies in his call for a special session, which that's what he's trying to do here. Instead, he's supposed to say, hey, look, you guys address property taxes. Then he could still go and talk to them about what he wants the plan to be. But I think he may have fumbled the ball right out of the gate on this special session by trying to overreach and tell lawmakers specifically what they need to do rather than working collaboratively with them. So I think we're still a long ways off from a resolution on this. But look, again, this was the top promise from Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick, was to offer people property tax relief, and they ain't getting it done right now. Yeah.
Let's talk about Attorney General Ken Paxton and what's happening with the impeachment and where we're looking forward to the Senate. Obviously, they're going to lay out the case against him, and obviously the Senate will decide whether or not he's guilty. Does that play out with Ken Paxton's wife being a state senator? Do you think she will be part of that process and weigh in? And I know you well enough to know that you've probably done some head counting on whether or not you think he will be found guilty in the Senate.
Trying to figure it out. Doing head counts right now is very difficult. I can tell you that senators, they're not just putting out statements that say that they don't want to talk about this. They're really not talking about it, even privately. I think to their credit, they're taking their role very seriously as the jurors in this trial, which is what we're going to see. Coming up on June 20th, the Senate will convene to consider rules for the way that the trial is going to be carried out. And the Senate also decided that the trial needs to start before the end of August. So we have some rough timeline already. As far as Angela Paxton, the wife of Ken Paxton, who is a state senator from Collin County up in DFW, not clear what she's going to do. The Texas Constitution says that all senators need to sit for the trial. So I don't know if that means that if she can just sit there and then not vote at the end or vote present. I think that would be one way to handle it. We'll see what they come up with. But it is interesting to note this, that if she recuses herself and if another senator has to recuse himself, and there's another senator, I can think of 3 right now who might have to recuse themselves for different reasons. If that happens, then the threshold for removing him from office goes down. If the entire Senate is there, it's 21 votes. But if 2 or 3 people are gone, it goes down to 20 votes and then 19 votes, and you don't have to have as many Republicans voting with all the Democrats, who I assume are all going to vote to remove Paxton. The coalition gets a little smaller to get the job done of removing him. That's going to be a key thing to watch going forward over the summer.
Scott, quickly, because we're running out of time, but do you think the fact that we have not heard the Lieutenant Governor or the Governor come out in support of Attorney General Paxton says anything?
For Patrick's part, it's I think he's handling it very responsibly. I thought he might be dismissive of this. Instead, in an interview that he gave to a TV station in Dallas, he said that the Senate's going to take their duty very seriously. There's probably some back channeling going on with the governor right now. I've heard some chatter about that, but he's not going to say anything either. It is telling that he went ahead and appointed an interim attorney general. He may want the person, the guy who was appointed today, John Scott, who so far has kind of been a fixer for Abbott. Previously, he was Secretary of State. You might remember that. He may go in there and clean house. It may be a signal, without saying anything publicly, that appointment might be a signal that Abbott is ready to move on from Ken Paxton.
Scott Braddock, the regular session over, but really far from it. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon. Thanks so much for being here.
All these sessions are special.
Yeah, they are. Thank you, Scott.
Keep up to date with all of San Antonio's top news, weather, and so much more by clicking the like and subscribe buttons below. And once again, thanks for watching KSAT.